that we're talking about a national issue, and we're introducing partisanship in it. This affects all concerned Nigerians. It doesn't affect only PDP, it doesn't affect only APC. So I would expect that we should speak to the president's speech. And if we look at, I'm going to speak to the president's speech, and then the presentation of the leader of the Senate. Mr. President, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria couched this budget of economic recovery and resilience. Mr. President, when you talk about recovery, it means that something has gone wrong, and you want to recover what has gone wrong. Mr. President was very sincere in the manner and from what he presented. And I'll go to the first page of the President's speech. This is not a partisan issue. This is not about whether this is done here or this is done here. This is about us Nigerians. Mr. President said, in the last quarter of this year, that is 2020, that the real GDP, gross domestic product of this country, contracted by 6.1%. That is an acceptance that something went fundamentally wrong. Mr. President, you move further. The President did say that the efforts that he's making, or the government is making, to create 100 million jobs in 10 years. Now, the problem that I have with that is that if we have an economy that has contracted by as much as 6.1%, because gross domestic product is the aggregate economic activities of a country. If that has contracted by 6.1%, with the following consequences, now it becomes very difficult for you to create 10 million jobs a year because the economic activities are no longer there. Efforts are being made. But those efforts, the 500 billion that was introduced in 2020, and as read by the minority whip of the Senate, Mr. President, the problem I have with that is that those are not items, most items that are not sustainable over a long period of time. For instance, the public works he mentioned is money that is to be paid only for 3 months. Mr. President, if we want to improve on an economy, you engage in activities or items that are not sustainable over a long period of time, I don't see how you'll be able to create 10 million jobs a year over a sustainable period of 10 years. That is number one. Mr. President did not hide anything that is in the 2021 budget. And on page 2 of his presentation, he did say that the rescope budget, the budget which we rescoped in 2020, we had, Mr. President, I would need a little bit of time because this thing I'm saying will help other colleagues to cue in. In 2020, we rescoped a budget to 10.8 billion with a deficit of about 3-point-something billion. Mr. President, the expected revenue was 5.8 billion. Out of this money, only 2.1 billion was realized in 2020. And so we have an understated deficit in 2020. Now, if we move to the expenditure side of 2020, the expenditure side, we expended 5.3 billion. Trillion. What we raised so far has been 2.1 trillion, which means that financing of this deficit has been done by printing of money by the central bank, which is very dangerous. And what that happens with the economy?
Is that a definitive statement or a suspicion?
Mr. President, when you engage in domestic borrowing, you are printing money. That is what it means. Domestic borrowing is printing of money. So we are basically, yes. Wait. Chairman Finance.
Senator Gabriel Susam.
Order.
Okay, okay. Okay, distinguished Senator Gabriel Suswam, just hold on, protect you, but let me correct an impression. I'm not an economist, neither are you. But I know that domestic borrowing does not strictly translate into printing of money. You go to banks and compete to get funds. So I think you. Okay, the chairman of finance will have your time. Continue. You are protected now.
Chairman, you are interjecting. You are interjecting. No, wait when your time comes. Mr. President, I'm not disputing what the leader and the chairman of finance is saying. But what I'm saying is this. Most of the time, Mr. President, when you do domestic borrowing, you crowd out the private sector. Mr. President, in his speech, talk about job creation. Job creation is not from government. It's from the private sector. Now, when you crowd out the private sector by domestic borrowing, because the government, most banks, even the central bank will rather prefer, even when you go to capital market, they will rather prefer government because government is more certain than private sector. So what in essence this budget has done in terms of borrowing, which is high, is that it's crowding out the private sector. And therefore, the Mr. President's intention of creating jobs will not be as realizable as he has stated here. That is what I was saying. But one of the ways of domestic borrowing is by printing money. There's no person who can doubt that. There are other ways, but that is also one of the ways. Mr. President, I will go to the 2021 budget and I'll raise, no. I'll go to the 2021 budget and the parameters. The leader
Mr.
of the
President,
Senate,
time up. He has
the leader of the
5
Senate,
minutes.
the leader of the Senate on page 4 of his statement also was very factual, and I thank him for being factual. There are issues that he raised on page 4 of his presentation, which worried us. Mr. President, you look at the deficit level, and he has stated that it is above the fiscal responsibility threshold. What we need to do is either that this Senate or this National Assembly take a resolution, because we are blatantly violating the laws which we have set out. If the threshold is 3% and we've gone above, it's 3.6 something percent. The leader have stated, Chairman Finance.
Order.
Distinguished colleagues, distinguished colleagues, please, let's listen to our colleagues in silence. But Senator Suswam, you have only 1 more minute to go.
Mr. President, you earlier on say that I usually balance it. I'm trying to balance things so that we can follow the debate, not to engage in extraneous things. We are here to debate the president's speech, the principles, and that is what I'm doing. Mr. President, the leader did mention, and it is in page 4 of his statement, that the borrowing is not sustainable and that we need to go outside of the box to sustain that. It's on page 4. I'm not saying anything that is outside of that speech. Mr. President, the deficit has gone beyond 3%, which is set by the statute which we passed. What I'm going with is argument that we need to, either by way of resolution, allow it. Solomon should wait and tell us that that is coming under the finance bill that is coming, so that we can do this. So now, Mr. President, the World Bank did say that debt service to revenue ratio should not be more than 22.5%. The debt service to ratio that we have as a country now is about 60%. The implication of that, Mr. President, is that for every 100 naira earned in this country, 60 naira of it goes on debt service. It's not sustainable, Mr. President. And we must accept the fact that we need to find a way in which we can reduce the borrowing. Finally, Mr. President, the chairman of finance led us, members of the committee, and we identified copiously that the GOC, government-owned enterprises, have engaged in excessive expenditure, which have added to the deficit. Mr. President, in his speech, also mentioned that minister, that is our responsibility, it's not the responsibility of ministers, that the minister should monitor what the GOEs are doing. Mr. President, I think that if we look critically at the expenditure level of government-owned enterprises, we will substantially reduce the deficit. Deficit of a government means that ab initio, we are unable to finance it. And the leader also mentioned finally, Mr. President, that for us, the financing of this deficit is from borrowing and proceed of sales. Mr. President, we have understated the deficit because those proceeds of sales have not started and they are not even mentioned. And so it will be difficult for us to now say that we can finance deficit. There are three financing items. We've continued to borrow. Like I said, the implication of borrowing is that everything is crowded out in the private sector. And so it becomes a vicious cycle. When we come into 2022 budget, we are going to borrow more. When will it end, Mr. President? That is the question.
Thank you very much.